Dr. Donna Harrison. It is a pleasure to invite her to our stage again this year. She is a fantastic pro-life representative, and I think that you guys, those of you who are staying in here, are going to have a tremendous presentation. I'm going to read her bio. If you want to follow along, you can do so in the app. If not, it's there so you can look back. Dr. Donna Harrison is a physician, board certified in I like messed this up last time too. Obstetrics. She's an OBGYN doctor. She is currently serving as Director of Research for the American Association of Pro-Life Obstetricians and Gynecologists, the largest non-sectarian pro-life physician organization in the world, which has over 7,000 members across the United States and associate members worldwide. Under her leadership as past CEO, Applog doubled membership, launched the annual Matthew Bolfin Educational Conference, developed an up-to-date website and social media presence, and launched systematic outreaches to the medical, legal, and policy communities to discuss the efforts of abortion on women. Dr. Harrison also serves as chair of the Alliance for the Hippocratic Medicine. Dr. Harrison's research interests include selective progesterone receptor modulators, endometrial contraception, maternal mortality, and abortion mortality and morbidity. She has authored peer-reviewed papers on the approval of RU486 and olapristal, which is Ella, as well as on the embryocidal potential of hormonal contraception. Dr. Harrison is a continuing medical education speaker in the United States and internationally on topics of medical abortion with mifepristone and misoprostol, adverse events associated with mifepristone and misoprostol, emergency contraception with ulipristal, maternal mortality, and abortion morbidity. Guys, she's an expert in everything. She served for 10 years as an adjunct professor at Trinity International University in Deerfield, Illinois, teaching postgraduate seminars at the annual Center for Bioethics and Human Dignity Summer Workshops. She is associate editor of the peer-reviewed medical journal, Issues in Law and Medicine. Dr. Harrison is married to Dr. Mark Harrison and is the mother of 5 children and 14 grandchildren. Please welcome her to the stage.
All right. Just make sure I can do this. All right. I am so happy to be here. You are my peeps, and it's just wonderful to see so many people here, especially college age and younger. It's great. I'm hoping today to be able to equip you to speak not only to your fellow Lutherans, not only to your fellow pro-lifers, but also to speak to those who may not be of any faith. So we're going to kind of go back and forth talking about important topics that you need to master. There's not many of them, but there's a few topics that you need to really be able to articulate clearly when you have an opportunity. I'm going to use up a little time here. Part of what you have to do when you're in this discussion is you have to understand clearly what is the issue? What are the issues involved? Okay, we can talk about pro-life, we can talk about pro-choice, but what's the real underlying issue that has paralyzed and polarized this country for the last 50 years? And I would argue it's actually polarized this country for the last 200 years. And that's part of what I want to describe to you. The issue really, in part, is science. In part, it's understanding where we come from as a human being and how we got here. And that's the part, for me, that was life-changing. When I took college biology and I realized how mammals are made, of which we're a mammal, it should make you fall on your knees. It's absolutely amazing that you can take a cell from one person's body, which is meant, its purpose is in another person's body, and make a third person. That is amazing, guys. The DNA from 2 different cells combining together in all of the infinite complexity that has to happen to not only form another being, but form another being that forms itself, that develops along its own trajectory. So that's what I want to kind of unpack for you scientifically. Okay, so how do we know what this thing is inside the womb? There is actually a very clear scientific definition for telling one kind of cell from another kind of cell. It rests on two criteria. One is differences in what something is made of, okay, its molecular composition, and two is differences in how the cell behaves. So you can tell one cell from another cell based on those two criteria. These two criteria are universally agreed upon scientifically. They're employed throughout science. They're not religious beliefs. They're not matters of personal opinion. They are objective, verifiable scientific criteria that determine precisely when a new cell is formed. The composition of a one-celled embryo, a zygote, is different from a sperm or egg. Why does that matter? Because people say, oh, well, you know, you just have a fertilized egg there hopping along, and then it hops into the uterus, and eventually it'll become a person. That's not the way it is. The reality is that once the sperm fuses with the egg, once the two membranes, the outer cell membranes fuse, you no longer have a sperm, and you no longer have an egg. What you have is a completely different organism, a completely different entity. So let's look at composition. A sperm has 23 chromosomes derived from the father, an egg has 23 chromosomes derived from the mother, and the zygote, that is the one-celled embryo, has 46 chromosomes of both mother and father origin. Well, what about the behavior of this zygote, okay? If you look at, some people will say, well, the entity in the womb is just a clump of cells. Well, how do clumps of cells behave? Collections of human cells, they're alive. An organ, the heart, is alive. They carry on the activities of cellular life. They're only heart cells. Heart cells only become heart cells. They don't become liver cells. They don't become legs and arms and eyes. They're just heart cells. They fail to exhibit a coordinated interaction directed toward any higher level of organization. So heart's going to be heart. Collections of cells do not establish complex, interrelated cellular structures. Heart cells don't make legs. They don't make organs. They don't make organ systems. They are not a whole living being. They're not an organism. They're an organ. True of the liver, the kidney, any other organ that you can think of. Well, what about a corpse? You know, when you die, your cells inside that body are still alive for a time, okay? But a human corpse is not a living organism, despite the presence of living human cells, because this collection of human cells no longer functions as an integrated unit. It is no longer an organism. So what we're talking about is the scientific criteria for saying, when does a new organism arise? So let's look at this zygote. The embryo is not something that is being passively built by the process of development. The mom's womb doesn't slap on a leg and slap on an arm and slap on a face. The embryo itself builds itself. The embryo is manufacturing itself. It is in control of its own behavior and growth. And that continues through embryo, right before you're born, after you're born, when you're a toddler, when you're your age, when you're an older adult. You are one continuous organism. You haven't changed. You are you, and you will be you until you die. So when does human life begin? A human zygote is a human organism by scientific definition, and an organism is just the scientific word for a being. So as human zygote, is a one-celled human being. This conclusion is objective, consistent with the factual evidence, and independent of any specific ethical, moral, political, or religious view of human life or of human embryos. But that is not what we're arguing about. We won that. Everyone who's honest scientifically will admit, yeah, this is an independent human organism, human being. What are we debating? The debate in our society and others is not over when human life begins. It's over at what point and for what reason do we have an obligation to respect and protect that life. Guess what, guys? You, as Lutherans, are uniquely equipped to answer that question. It's a biblical question. Who's my neighbor? On one occasion, an expert of the law stood up to test Jesus. He said, "Teacher, what must I do to inherit eternal life?" "What's written in the law?" he replied. "How do you read it?" He answered, "Love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your strength and with all your mind, and love your neighbor as yourself." "You've answered correctly," Jesus replied. "Do this, and you will live." But he wanted to justify himself, so he asked Jesus, and who is my neighbor?" In reply, Jesus said, "A man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho when he was attacked by robbers. They stripped him of his clothes, beat him, and went away, leaving him half dead. A priest happened to be going down the same road, and when he saw the man, he passed by on the other side. So to a Levite, when he came to the place and saw him, passed by on the other side. But a Samaritan, as he traveled, came where the man was, and when he saw him, he took pity on him. He went to him and bandaged his wounds, pouring on oil and wine. Then he put the man on his own donkey, brought him to an inn, and took care of him. The next day he took out 2 denarii and gave them to the innkeeper. "Look after him," he said, "and when I return, I will reimburse you for any extra expense you may have." Which of these 3 do you think was a neighbor to the man who fell into the hands of robbers? The expert in the law replied, "The one who had mercy on him." Jesus told him, "Go and do likewise." You know, as Lutherans, we know that story. But I want you to see something in that story that maybe you might not have seen before. The Samaritan humanized that Jew on the road. He said, "This is a fellow human being, and I am going to extend my life to actually take care of that fellow human being." Yep, cost him a couple denarii. He wasn't riding the donkey with the sick man. He was pulling the donkey, and the sick man was riding on the donkey. So it cost him something to exercise that recognition of the humanity of this person who was in trouble. And you know, we can do that. In fact, we're called to do that. That's what you're here for. So, who is my neighbor? How do we talk about this? As a Lutheran, if all human beings are made in the image of God, who is the I Am, and if the incarnation of Christ took into divinity our humanity from the moment of fertilization through and into the embryonic, fetal, neonatal, child, and adult stages of human beings, through death and into the resurrection, if that's true, then all human beings are in my sphere of love and protection. So my neighbor is the human being that God has put into my life to care for as he cares for me. So where you stand on the abortion debate, and this is something you have to be really facile with as you talk about this topic, where you stand on the debate depends on how you view the entity that's in the womb. Biology clearly demonstrates that a human being exists in the womb from the time of fertilization. How do we bridge that to argue that you should care? Well, as human beings, even in the secular world, we protect and cherish other human beings because they are human, just as we are human. All human beings bear the image of God. We know that as a Christian, just as we bear the image of God. And we cherish all human beings because God cherishes them, and he cherishes us. The whole abortion debate centers around these three terms: human being, human person, and what is an abortion. So I'm going to unpack that a little bit for you. What's a human being? If you look in the dictionary definition, it's a human. It's pretty easy. What's a human person? It's a little different. A person is the object of legal rights. There are two kinds of legal persons. One, human beings. Human beings have always been recognized, even in the law. This is a Collins Dictionary of Law definition. Human beings are recognized as a person, and artificial persons like corporations. So, to make a more secular argument, all right, those we recognize to be like us, human beings or human persons, they fall into our sphere, our circle of protection. Human beings and human persons being interchangeable. Anything, any entity outside of our circle is treated as property. So we have persons, humans, and we have property. But what happens when you take human beings outside of human persons? Well, that is dehumanization. That allows for slavery. That allows for genocide, because they're not really humans, right? That allows for euthanasia, because this person is no longer a person, it's no longer a human. It allows for infanticide, because this human being hasn't achieved personhood yet. It allows for abortion. How many of you recognize this painting? Good, at least a couple of people here. Good, great. Is this a human being? Yeah. Is this human being a person? It wasn't always considered so, okay? The question of whether or not Dred Scott qualified as a human being was considered to be a moot one by the court, the Supreme Court of the United States. They said, yeah, you can argue that he's a human being, we can't argue against that, but that's irrelevant. What's relevant is whether or not he qualified as a person. That is an object of legal rights. And the Supreme Court decided that Dred Scott was not a person, nor could anyone of African descent ever be a person in the United States. That's why we fought a civil war. The same kind of dehumanization is happening now and has been happening in the medical profession. This is from a medical ethics class at University of Missouri Medical School, and it's the ethics class on personhood. What is personhood? Adult human beings are commonly considered persons, and a very interesting question to ask yourself is exactly what is it about us that makes us persons? So this attempt to separate human from person. Clearly it's not having a particular hair color or even having hair, or being a particular height or weight or having a brain, etc. The concept of metaphysical personhood would be used to call personhood a basic category of reality encompassing certain beings, not all human beings, but beings of a certain type, rational moral agents, those who use language, etc. What are they talking about? There's no criteria for personhood. These are some of the criteria that have been suggested. Rationality or logical reasoning ability. Some of us in the room may not be persons. Consciousness. You're not conscious if you're under anesthesia. Self-consciousness, self-awareness. Use of language. Which language, by the way? Ability to initiate action. So if you're a paraplegic, you're not a person. Moral agency and the ability to engage in moral judgments. When does that happen? For boys, age 25. For girls, age 21. Okay, so are you not a person before that time? Intelligence. How much intelligence? Does having one or more of these make us a person? Do we have to have all of them? Can we have some minimal set? Does it have to be the same set for all persons? You see how the ridiculousness of separating human being from human person and saying, well, we're only going to protect persons, but we can't even agree about what a person is or what makes a person a person. And this is the kind of ethics that you get at University of Missouri Medical School. This is kind of sad, guys. All of the efforts to dehumanize the human being in the womb boiled down to 4 questions, which are really beautifully articulated by a guy named Scott Klusendorf. I don't know, any of you know Scott Klusendorf? Okay, you should know him. He articulates this beautifully. He's one of the best pro-life apologists in a long time. It's SLED, size, level of development, environment, or dependency. And I'm going to take you through Scott's acronym to try to help you remember how to talk about this. Okay? Size. The human being in the womb is clearly smaller than a born human being. A 4-year-old is smaller than a 14-year-old. If we can't reasonably kill a 4-year-old just because the 4-year-old is smaller than a 14-year-old, then we cannot also reasonably, logically say that we can kill a human being in the womb because he or she is smaller than a born human being. Level of development. A human being in the womb is less developed than a born human being. But a 10-year-old is also less developed than a 20-year-old. Since we can't justify killing a 10-year-old simply because they're less developed than a 20-year-old, we also can't justify killing human beings in the womb simply because they're less developed than born human beings. And by the way, this becomes a really interesting argument when you talk about 23-week babies in the womb versus outside. The only thing that distinguishes the two is 2 inches of skin. Okay? A 23-week baby, yeah, not very developed, but they're developed enough to live outside the mom's womb. Environment. The human being in the womb is in a different environment. So is an astronaut or a scuba diver. Since we don't justify killing scuba divers or astronauts when they're in a different environment, how can we justify killing a human being just because they're a few inches away from being outside the womb? Dependency. Human beings in the womb are dependent on their mothers. Newborns, toddlers, preschoolers, and early teens are also dependent on their parents, but that doesn't justify killing them. So, if you can be facile with understanding human being and human person and how the side that justifies killing human beings in the wombs tries to separate human being from human person, if you can be able to put that back together again, you've come a long way toward being able to articulate a secular defense of human life. There is one more term that you have to be exquisitely clear about, okay, and that is the term abortion. So we're going to unpack that a little bit. You know, before the Dobbs decision, the group that I work with, American Association of Pro-Life OB-GYNs, compiled 50 years worth of research showing the effects of abortion on women. And when Dobbs came down and it was no longer this ridiculous fantasy that somehow the Constitution talked about abortion, which it doesn't, or protected abortion, which it doesn't. When Dobbs came down, we were ready to paper up. Okay, you OB-GYNs that want to kill babies in the womb, you show us the papers that you show us the research that abortion is actually good for women, and we will show you 50 years of research that shows abortion is horrible for women, not only physically, increasing preterm birth, causing women who have had abortions to either not be able to get pregnant or to not even want to get pregnant, never to have another baby again. 1/3 of women who abort their first child never have a living child. 1/3. Okay, we've got the papers. Breast cancer, abortion and breast cancer. If you abort your first baby and you delay having another child, you've increased your risk of breast cancer. Why? Because the pregnancy itself matures the breast to make milk. Milk-producing tissue is cancer resistant. If you have a pregnancy and you've got all this breast stimulation and it doesn't mature to milk, you have just increased your risk of breast cancer. Okay? We got all these papers. We're ready. And what happened? Insanity. Blinding snow around the term abortion. An equivocation on this term. And that's why I want you to be crystal clear as to what it is that we're talking about. Because abortion does have about probably 16 different definitions, depending on, if you look up the term, the medical definitions. There's only one that we're talking about here in this issue. So I used a Merriam-Webster medical definition of abortion, which is pretty good because it highlights the 2 points. Abortion is the termination of a pregnancy after, accompanied by, resulting in, or closely followed by the death of the embryo or fetus. So there's 2 things that we're talking about. We're talking about the separation of the mother and the fetus, birth, either birth of a live child or birth of a child that's not alive. And in the case of abortion, we're talking about the death of the fetus. Okay, so keep those 2 things in mind. Separation of a mother and the fetus can happen spontaneously. Okay, that's what birth is. That's what a miscarriage is. Okay, in a miscarriage, the baby's died, and the mom passes the baby. Okay, this happens without any human intervention. That's why it's called spontaneous. Versus induced. The separation happens because of human intervention. And here I want you to be really clear about something, because this is a really important point. Sometimes pro-life OB-GYNs have to separate the mom and the baby before the baby is able to survive outside the womb. Why? Because there are some situations in which if you don't separate the mom and the baby, you will lose both of them. And if you do, you'll lose one and hopefully save one. So to save the life of the mother. But we would argue, the American Association of Pro-Life OB-GYNs has articulated this quite clearly on their website. We would argue that that is not the same as an abortion. And I'll tell you why. Because an elective induced abortion is a separation done for a particular purpose, and that is to produce a dead baby. And actually, the American College of OB-GYN and the CDC agree with this definition. That's how they define an abortion. And that's at any point in pregnancy. See, to save a mother's life after 22 weeks, you deliver her. Okay, you do a C-section. You have a live mom and a live baby. But when you're doing an elective induced abortion after 22 weeks, you guarantee this baby does not make it out alive. And I guess I can't say this too much. You have to understand this is what we're fighting against. We're fighting against giving a drug or doing a procedure in order to produce a dead baby. That's the purpose. How did we get here? Here we are talking about medicine, which was supposed to be something that healed and fought disease. Pregnancy is not a disease, by the way. It's actually a normal part of a normal human body, a normal process of a normal human body. 2,500 years ago, there was a physician called Hippocrates who said, I'm going to do it differently. All the Greek doctors, they're performing abortions. My students are not going to perform abortions. Neither are they going to give a drug to kill somebody. And his school of thought in medicine went from the minority opinion in Greece in 2,500 years ago, 500 BC. From there to the basis of medical ethics for 2,000 years until recently, until recently. People saying, oh, it's okay for medicine to do whatever medicine wants to do. No, that's not the Hippocratic Oath. The justification for abortion rests on 4 lies. These are lies that dehumanize. The first is it's just a blob of tissue. And I really do want you to go to the Endowment for Human Development website and watch that video. It's really cool. Okay, the baby in the womb is not a blob of tissue. It's a fully functioning human being, and you can walk through the stages of development with that human being. Abortion is better for women. Better than what? Better than childbirth? I don't think so. If you actually look at the studies, you hear this, oh man, abortion's 40 times safer than childbirth. Well, that's baloney. Abortion has its own set of risks, and when you talk about a woman being 10 weeks pregnant and continuing her pregnancy or having an abortion, it's obvious that continuing the pregnancy at 10 weeks is much safer than having an abortion. So it's completely lies, and like I said, on our website you can find extensively referenced papers about the effects of abortion on women. This is where the money comes in. We don't want those kind of people reproducing. The money that funds the media, that funds the spin, is about population control. Now, there's a whole lecture that could be given on that, maybe many. But I want you to understand and remember there's more going on in this issue than just simply killing the human beings in the womb. And the last one, and this is one we can affect. If he can walk away, I can walk away. But you know what? Women don't walk away from abortion. They have the abortion, and 10, 15, 20, 30, 40 years later, they're still crying about it. Okay, so you don't really walk away from your child. The thing is, when you're pregnant, when you have another human being inside your body, there's only 2 possible logical outcomes that you can have. You are already a mother. You can be the mother of a living baby, or you can be the mother of a baby who's died. There's no other possibility. You can't be an unmother. Abortion doesn't unmother you. It just makes you the mother of a baby who's died. And that you carry with you the rest of your life. What about the he can walk away part? I really want to challenge the guys in this room. Okay, I'm making a gross oversimplification here, okay? But there is the thought in some male circles that being sexually intimate is a 5-minute commitment. For women, it's a 20, 30, 40, 50-year commitment, okay? It's not the same. There's an asymmetry here. Guys, when you father a baby, you are a father. And that carries with it all the responsibilities. If you're not ready for that, there's an easy solution. Don't have sex, okay? Don't have sex until you're ready for that. And that means sex with your wife, who you have a lifelong commitment to. That's what God expects of us. I mean, it's very clear. I want to take you to some research that I found very interesting and challenging, and I think will be helpful for you. CareNet did a survey of women who had had abortions and seeking out the reasons why and what are these women like, okay? What are women's reasons for seeking abortion? They never found one woman anywhere who got pregnant in order to have an abortion. That's just not the way it works, okay? Abortion is seen as a way out of a difficult situation, but there's no way out. How did these women come to the conclusion? What influenced them to decide to have an abortion? 38%, that's over a third of women, indicate that the father of the baby was the most influential person in their abortion decision. The father of the baby. In another study, it was over half. Okay? So, a lot of women, rightly so, feel very vulnerable and powerless when they're pregnant. Okay? It's a terrifying position. And if the person who is supposed to protect you says, I'm not protecting you, I don't even know if it's mine. I mean, what an insult. So let me share a story with you. How did I go from being a full-time OB-GYN to actually speaking out on this issue? A number of different factors. But I had a patient who was 10 weeks pregnant with, the father was a significant other that she'd lived with for about 7 years. They weren't married. And she came to me and said she was pregnant. I said, I'll just call her Jane. I said, Jane, come on in. Let's do an ultrasound. Let's find out if the baby's alive, how far along you are, and then we'll talk. And I said, and I want your SO in here too. All right, so she comes in. Baby performs well, 10 weeks, waving, kicking, jumping, heartbeat, beautiful. I said, man, Jane, congratulations. You're pregnant. She goes, Dr. Harrison, I've got a 13-year-old daughter. I raised by myself. I can't do this again. And Fred, I'll just call him Fred, in the corner said, nothing. I said, Jane, so you're telling me if you had somebody that would walk with you through this child's life, be there for you, would you have this baby? She said, I can't do it by myself. I've done it. I've got a 13-year-old. I'm raising by myself. And Fred said, nothing. I'm not a patient person. I said, Fred, stand up. I want you to come over here and look at the ultrasound. Okay? Dutifully put down his comic books and came over and looked at the ultrasound and went back and sat down. I said, Fred, did you hear what Jane said to you? He goes, well, it's her body. It's her choice. That was the end. He killed his baby because Jane knew he wasn't going to be there for her. So she went out, she had the abortion, came back, and said, Dr. Harrison, I told her to come back to me afterward. She said, Dr. Harrison, that was the worst thing I ever did. And I dumped Fred because I realized he was not there for me. And why didn't you try harder to talk me out of it? Boy, that hit me like a ton of bricks. Why didn't I? Because I didn't know any of these things. I didn't know how bad abortion was for women. This was about 30 years ago. And that's why American Association of Pro-Life OB-GYNs has the information on their website that we have. Because I don't ever want another OB-GYN to not be able to tell their patient, look, this is what you're facing. Okay? So I bring this all up to say, yes, we focus on the woman, but there's another person involved. There's the father. And the father needs to man up. And if you're not going to man up, don't have sex with her. Don't create this baby to die if you're not going to be there for her. 57% of women who obtained an abortion experienced a potentially traumatic life event in the 12 months leading up to their abortion. The most common factors included she lost a job, she broke up with her boyfriend, or she's falling behind on rent or mortgage. Does this sound like empowerment to you? Only 12% of women had any kind of a physical problem. We're not talking life-threatening, we're talking anything among reasons for having an abortion. And only 1% reported that they were survivors of rape, and less than half of 1% incest. Good thing it doesn't happen in the church, right? More than 1/3 of abortion recipients reported that they attended church at least once a month at the time of their first abortion. 70% of women who have had an abortion indicate that their religious preference is Christian. A third were Catholic, a third were Protestant, and a little less than that were non-denominational. It didn't break down for Lutheran. Sorry, guys. We end up being Protestant. 1/3 of women who have had an abortion indicate that they currently attend church once a week or more. 1/3 of women were attending a Christian church once a month or more at the time of their first abortion. And half the women who had abortions, who were Christians, agreed that their church did not have a ministry prepared to discuss options during an unplanned pregnancy. Hey guys, this is low-hanging fruit. If you have not heard God's call in your life yet, let me emphasize his call in your life. 51% of women who had abortions said their church does not have a ministry prepared to discuss options. You can change that. You can change that. So what can you do? Well, you got to walk the talk yourself. Marriage is the context for sexual intimacy. I know that makes you so boring and so open to ridicule. You'll never regret it. You'll never regret it. You'll find the guy with character that wants a woman with character, and that's what marriages are made of. Help your church connect with the resources that are currently available in your community. Find out where your pregnancy resource center is and what services they offer. Find out who is teaching sex ed in your schools. Okay, not all of you are going to Lutheran schools. Some of you are going to public schools. Who's doing the sex ed? In Michigan, Planned Parenthood is the one who does sex ed in the schools. Raise a stink. You're a student. Raise a protest about that. Help your church answer the question, who will she talk to? Oh, I didn't talk about this. What do you, now I just blew that one. Let me go back. Between the time of diagnosis of pregnancy and the time of completion of an abortion, what do you think? 7 days. 7 days. How many times is she going to be in church during that 7 days? Once. Who's she going to talk to? We got to answer this question. This is something that your generation needs to answer in the Lutheran Church. Who's she going to talk to? And connect yourself to pregnancy resource centers. You're going to meet some incredible people who know the love and forgiveness of Christ, incredible people who are willing to share and step out and be courageous and talk to people who are in that moment of decision, in that moment of crisis. You can be Christ's hands and feet and heart and words to her. You can be. And to him. Okay, guys, I'm not just saying this for women. It's for you guys too, because there's a lot of guys who also are terrified. They're deer in the headlights. They need somebody to come beside them and say, hey man, I'm with you. Let's do this, do the right thing. Okay? Your voice is critically important. And then never forget, breathe hope. It's a beautiful thing. God has given this human being to this woman and this man for a reason. Not because he hates them, because he loves them. There's incredible power and beauty in the process of pregnancy and giving birth. It's a wonderful thing. Never forget that breathing hope, okay? It's Christ who's the source of our life and hope and freedom and empowerment in the Holy Spirit. And remember, the truth is what casts out lies. Thank you. If you have any questions, I'm happy. We've got a little bit extra time, so I'm happy to take them. I know it says text questions, but I have no way to do that.
So there are
Okay.
2 ways you can ask questions. One, if you're like, oh, I've got a question, but I don't really want to stand up and ask this in front of everyone, text this number, and I'll tell her what the question is. If you have questions, and you're not afraid, you can stand up and ask the question, or just speak very loudly. That's fine too. So we are going to take 5 to 10 minutes to answer any questions that you might have. Okay?
I'm going to answer one question. I'm not related to Matthew Harrison. It's a different. Yeah, go ahead.
Can you talk a little bit about the chemical abortions with the pill?
Yeah.
And how that's affecting the amount of physical abortions happening in clinics, and what are the ramifications physically of a chemical abortion?
Great. I got another 2-hour talk that I will give on that. No, seriously, thank you for that question. So we think of abortion as a surgical procedure. People go into the abortion clinic. You can protest outside of it. Over half, some say even 80% of abortions right now are done by the abortion pill. What does the abortion pill do? It blocks the hormone that causes a woman's body to be able to carry the baby. So it starves the baby. You hear ridiculous things like, well, it's safer than Tylenol. No, it's not safer than Tylenol. Doesn't land 1 out of 10 women in the emergency room. Okay, the abortion pill does. Why do they go there? They're hemorrhaging. They got tissue left inside. When I say 1 out of 10, that's under the best circumstances. That's if you are less than 8 weeks pregnant. What happens if you're 12 weeks? What happens if you think you're 8 weeks pregnant, but you're actually a month or a month and a half more along? 1 out of 3. 1 out of 3 end up in the emergency room needing surgery to complete an abortion. Okay, that is abysmal. That is not Tylenol. So it's a big fat lie that this is safer than Tylenol. There are multiple problems with the way the abortion pill is being handed out. And in fact, if it weren't abortion, this would be write the check malpractice. Okay. Women are not being given informed consent. How can I say that blanket? Because they're not getting an ultrasound. Unless you know how far along, exactly how far along in pregnancy you are, you cannot say what your risk is for taking the abortion drug. Like I said, 8 weeks versus 12 weeks, 1 out of 10 versus 1 out of 3. Okay? So women are not being given informed consent. They're not being told about the bleeding. They're not being told about the risks. You know, women have died from overwhelming sepsis because the abortion drug actually works not just at the womb, works on your immune system. Makes you unable to fight off a soil bacteria called Clostridium sordelii. If you don't believe me, type Mifeprex FDA label, and there's a big black box warning about sepsis. And it's a sneaky kind of sepsis, because the only way you know it is if your white count is really, really high. You may not even have a fever. Women have died, and we're talking perfectly healthy women who are dead in 24 to 48 hours. Okay, so that's a problem. Problem of, what if the baby's not in your womb? What if it's an ectopic pregnancy? That is where the baby's planted outside. The only way you know is an ultrasound. Okay, 3% of pregnancies are ectopic. What happens if you take the abortion pill and you have an ectopic pregnancy? Doesn't treat the ectopic pregnancy. You have pain and bleeding. So women call the abortionist, I'm really in pain and I'm bleeding. And they respond, honey, that's an abortion. Lay down, take some Tylenol and call me in the morning. And they die because pain and bleeding were symptoms of a rupturing ectopic pregnancy, and they hemorrhage to death. Okay, it's a serious problem. And they're not getting RhoGAM. So if you're Rh negative, you have A negative or O negative or B negative blood, every time you have a baby, you need a medicine called RhoGAM so that later your body doesn't mount an immune response to the next baby. Okay? If you don't get RhoGAM, you have a high chance of losing that next baby, maybe a third. Okay, so the problems are enormous. And what if you order this thing by mail? You don't know how far along you are. There are women who thought they were, just a few weeks along, delivering a 20-week baby into the toilet who died. I mean, it's a serious problem. So I could, like I said, it's a 2-hour lecture, but it's not as safe as Tylenol. It's a big fat lie that it is, and you guys should, dig into this because it's horrific what's going on.
Dr. Harrison, what if you take that abortion pill, can you go back, can you undo?
Thank you so much for asking that. Okay, the way the abortion pill works is it blocks progesterone in your body. Progesterone is the hormone that allows you to carry the baby. But it's a reversible blockade. We know this from the drug development literature. Okay, it's a competitive reversible blockade. That means if you give enough progesterone, you can kick the Mifeprex off of the progesterone receptor. There are 7,000 babies who are alive because they got progesterone. A woman took Mifeprex, changed her mind, or someone gave her Mifeprex, she was forced into it or tricked into it. She got help. She called the Abortion Pill Reversal Network, and she took progesterone, and the baby was saved. It's a wonderful thing. It's a simple thing. You'll have people say, oh, well, that's not evidence-based. Baloney. It's as evidence-based as Narcan is with opioids. It's as evidence-based as oxygen is with carbon monoxide poisoning. It's the same thing. And progesterone is a natural hormone that's been used for 50 years. There's somebody else back here.
What about the argument saying that if we make it illegal now, they'll still find ways and we'd rather have it in a clinic than...
Yeah, I've heard that argument. There's a wonderful study from Chile where Chile owns the medical records, so they've got really good statistics of when abortion was legal and the mortality, the maternal mortality, and then it was made illegal. And at the point it was made illegal, both maternal mortality decreased and abortion mortality decreased because it wasn't done as often. The issue is how often abortion is done. And when you make it illegal, it isn't done as much. It's a deterrent.
So the other group is out.
Yeah, okay. Thank you very much.